Welcome back to the American Dream Podcast Season 3. Now it's time to hear what Americans think of their dream. I'm your host, Ekaterina. Привет! I'm in a studio with John Stroup. You are very well known here in the community, and I'm very excited to get to know you as well. I know that you've had pretty hard life path. You went from being in prison to becoming a pastor at church.
Yes.
That's a pretty big change. And I want to learn all about this. So let's begin. So when and where were you born?
I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and raised in Jefferson City, Missouri.
Okay. So let's just dive straight into topic. You are a former inmate. Can you share a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, sure. So I come from what I call generational crime, addiction, and poverty. And so everybody I've ever known growing up was a drug dealer, drug addict, or both. And I really don't have anyone to blame. I'm not blaming my upbringing. I did what I knew was wrong. And so I went from a drug dealer. I was a drug dealer. Me and my mother sold drugs together. We were crime partners. And then when she died, I was in my early 20s. And a year after my mom died, my brother overdosed. And a year after my brother overdosed, my brother shot my other brother. And so I went from a drug dealer to a drug dealer, drug addict, to a homeless dope addict. And so I was selling drugs, living on the street from my early 20s, from 1999 till 2008. And then I went to prison for selling drugs. And so I went to prison. I found a Bible in a prison cell. I wanted to know what Jesus did with bad guys because I was one. And I realized that we're all bad and that he alone was good. And so I surrendered my life to him. And I found out I was a poster child for Christianity according to what the Bible says. And so that was it. I mean, I asked to be used like the drugs used me and had nowhere to go, had no family. Everybody I knew was dead or in prison. Had no money, lived off $5 a month in a prison cell. Was there for 18 months. And but that's it. I mean, that's where my new life began, was in a prison cell in July of 2008. Mm-hmm. June 2008.
So what was it like to know that you will go to prison?
Well, for me, I didn't get arrested. I got rescued. So it was, I lived a really hard life. And so living on the streets, being homeless, being an IV drug user, for my whole adult life being on drugs, from 15 years old, 14 years old to my early 20s, until I was 30, really. When I was 30 is when I went to prison. And so for over 15 years, being a drug addict, being in prison was being rescued for me. It wasn't, I got alone with God. I slept every night. I ate every day. And so for me, it was a good thing. It was a good place.
Mm-hmm. How were the other prisoners? Did you like them? Oh,
yeah. I mean, you don't like everybody, I don't like everybody today, and I'm a pastor, I'll be honest with you. But you have personality issues and stuff. But I was really focused in prison. And so there's a camaraderie, you meet people that have the same views as you do. And so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you said you were eating well in prison, you were sleeping well. What was your favorite prison food?
Oh, I don't think I have one. It wasn't. So for me, growing up poor and not really having anything, you don't complain about food. There's only one food in the world I don't eat, and that's hominy. And I learned that in prison. So prison food is terrible, I'll be honest with you. But when you're on drugs, you don't eat. And when you're on drugs, you don't sleep. And so to eat and sleep is when you hadn't really ate good and slept in 15 years, it was a good thing. Absolutely. So there is no for favorite prison food, but it was food. It was something to eat. So what happens when you meet a prisoner bully? Did that happen to you? You can't see me on the radio, but I'm not I don't look like the guy to bully, and I'm not trying to be prideful or anything, but I'm a pretty big guy. I'm 250 pounds. I'm 6'1", tattoos. I really didn't have any problem with anybody trying to bully me.
Mm-hmm. So when you were in prison, were you in the private cell or with other prisoners?
I was in general population.
General. Okay. I don't know those terms.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
We'll learn today. So
yes, absolutely.
You have protective custody, and then you have general population. And so I was in general population.
Okay. Then let's imagine that you were in a private cell. Do you think your experience would have been different?
No, I don't. I mean, sure, it would have been different because I would have been in a private cell. But, I believe that people that come from where I come from, and that you have to hit rock bottom. And rock bottom is a state of mind. It's not a place. And so for me, it was everything coming crashing down on me, my whole life, all the mistakes I made. And so it was prison wasn't the place that really changed me. It was what happened in prison that changed my life. And it could have happened anywhere, in a private cell, in the hole, which is administrative segregation, or wherever. So,
mm-hmm. What would you say to young people who are taking their steps on a criminal path?
Well, there is no such thing as a successful criminal. There's only one place that you go, and there's two places. You go to prison for the rest of your life, or you die. So that's it. So I would say that there, I tell people this all the time. So I deal with people who sell drugs, use drugs. Generally, it's around addiction, and I ask them, what do you make selling drugs successfully? Well, you may say I make $100,000 selling drugs for so many months. So if you get 10 years in prison, and you make $100,000 in 3 or 4 months, and you go to prison, and you get $7 a month from the government, what could you have made at Chick-fil-A? Mm-hmm. Or what could you have made? You're not coming up in life. You're losing your life. Mm-hmm. And so I would steer them away from any kind of criminal activity, because it's domestic terrorism. It's destroying our nation.
So do people of specific ethnicities and nationalities really exclusively hang out together in prison?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you have state prison and federal prison. So state prison is when you commit a crime against the state you live in. Federal prison is when you commit a crime against the United States government. And so federal prison is worse racially than state prison. And it depends on what state you go to. So there's other states, some states are worse than other states. Does that make sense as far as racial segregation? So if you look at me, you don't know what color I am. I don't even know what color I am.
Well, you're covered in tattoos.
I am covered in tattoos, but I don't play the race card. I have a lot of friends that are all kinds. My daughter is African American, and so, but it is a thing. It is a thing.
Mm-hmm. How do you feel about death penalty?
Ooh, that's a good question. Death penalty. So the Bible speaks about an eye for an eye, and it says you shall not murder. Murder and the death penalty are not the same. And so I'm a Christian, and I believe I live from what the Word of God teaches. And so that's the authority of my life. And so I believe that the Bible speaks clearly about people deserving capital punishment, but capital punishment and murder are not the same. And so I believe that there is a place for that. That's what I believe. You're going to get me talking on this and get me probably in a lot of trouble, but that's okay. I believe people who rape someone deserve the death penalty, and that should be a law. So yeah, I mean, it's true. You take a life, you take someone's pure, childhood, and you molest somebody or you rape someone, you deserve the death penalty. So.
Absolutely. So we know what happened to you after you got out of jail. It did the good thing for you. For others, in your opinion, what good can come from being in jail?
So you have to take advantage of the opportunity. It just depends. Either you go into prison and come out a more skilled criminal, or you go to prison and you come out someone who wants to change their life. Prisons don't work. prisons are not reforming anyone. We don't need more prisons. And so what we do is we have what we call discipleship training, but I don't know if you knew this, but we have homes for men and women to live in called discipleship houses. We have 50 men and women in southern Missouri. We're an alternative to prison for 7 counties in the state of Missouri. And so reform is what I do. And so prison doesn't change people. But the time away, off the street, away from the atmosphere you came from, you can't quit prison. You can quit rehab. You can quit a treatment center, but you can't quit prison. And so being away and having time to think, it just depends on your attitude when you go into prison.
Mm-hmm.
So for some, you're going to make more connections and find more drug dealers and learn how to do crime in different ways, and you're going to come out and go right back. For some, you're going to come to rock bottom and say, I want to live a different life. And hopefully when you get out, you'll head towards being reformed.
Mm-hmm. So how did you feel when you were released from prison?
So when I got out of prison, I didn't even have any clothes to wear. They had a donation box for people who didn't have family to send them clothes. And I found something in the box to put on. I had nothing. I had a missionary named Dewey Houston that wrote me in prison for 18 months. And he wrote me a letter recommendation. So I went to a halfway house in a place called Cuba, Missouri. So I was very scared when I got out of prison. I remember having this little card, and like I said, I lived off $5 a month, and that's what the state of Missouri gave me. It's called state tip for people who are indigent in prison, who are poor, and I didn't have a GED. I had no education. I got my education in prison, and so I have this card, and I remember being at a bus station. I had nobody to call. Had no family, and I was hungry and thirsty, and my card couldn't buy me a drink and a bag of chips. I had to pick which one, and I remember it almost made me cry because I felt defeated, like I have nothing, and so it was scary. It was a 16-hour trip on a bus to a place I'd never been, and so I was scared.
How long were you in prison for?
Well, I did over 2 years in the county jail, and then I did 18 months in prison.
So what was the first thing that you did when you were released? Where did you go after prison?
I went to a place in Cuba, Missouri, and I was there 21 days. And so, and I couldn't find work. I looked for work, and there was no work. It was 2009. In September, it was a recession, and I couldn't find a job. And so I looked for work, met the people in the group home I lived in, and then 21 days later, the missionary that wrote me came and picked me up and brought me to Springfield, Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
So
how did all of that experience change you?
It grew my faith. It taught me endurance. The Bible says that count your trials as joy. Every trial is joy because the testing of your faith produces endurance, and you can't get it anywhere else but going through a trial. And so I crawled through on my belly and went without nothing. And I remember when I came to Springfield, I lived in the homeless shelter, the Salvation Army homeless shelter. I was there for almost a year, and just those times were hard, but it was also sweet because I can look back on it now. And we have homes today for men and women, and we are in 4 states and 2 countries. And also the structure of our homes are built from those times when I was in those shelters, and so it was all for a purpose.
So what was the biggest challenge you faced besides not having money, looking for a job when you were released?
Dealing with loneliness. If you're in a shelter, you're in a prison, just imagine getting no mail. imagine I never made a phone call one time from prison. I had no one to call. And so you're around people and they're all on the phone and they're all talking to their families and they're getting mail and they're looking at the pictures of their wife and their kids and you don't have anything or any phone calls or any mail, just being content to be with God and not having that and dealing with that loneliness was a struggle. And then, I was scared of church people. They freaked me out. I thought I wore a turtleneck sweater every Sunday because I was embarrassed of my tattoos. And I was scared to talk to people because I figured they're so perfect, they'll never accept me, And so just breaking that stereotype and that barrier.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of loneliness is actually what every immigrant, well, not every, but most immigrants have to deal with coming to America. So in some way, immigrants and prisoners have something in common, I guess you can say, because not everybody can afford to call back to their family that is overseas, or at least me and my mom had that struggle as well. So with that being said, I want to ask you a little bit about your roots. Okay. Because we know America is the country of immigrants. Okay. Everyone here is an immigrant, or at least have been. What generation of immigrants are you? Do you know?
I have no idea. I wish I could answer that. My mother told me that I was Blackfoot Indian, and so on my mom's side, and my dad was German and Dutch, but my dad died when I was 2. And so I don't know him, never did, don't know any of his family. So I was raised by a single mom. My brothers and sisters were old enough to be my mothers and fathers. I really don't know.
Then what do you think about American Dream?
As far as, be more specific.
What do you think about that concept? Does it exist?
Yes, absolutely. I just got back from South Africa. We have a ministry there in Cape Town. And this is my 5th trip. And it's always it takes 30 hours to get there and 30 hours to get home. And it's a third world country. And we live in the greatest country in the world. A lot of Americans, they, whatever political, I don't get off on that stuff, but, whatever twist or whatever idea they have about how our country's going down and all this stuff. And I get a lot of that, but let me tell you, coming from a third world country, we live in the land of opportunity, and I believe that honestly, I have big dreams, and so I come from nothing. I have nothing. I mean, poor, and America poor, not third world poor, but probably not Russia poor. But when I got out of prison, I had nothing, and I have a family now. And I live on a farm outside of Springfield, and we have cows. And 3 years ago, Sunday, we adopted a little girl. Her name is Zenley Jean. I adopted her from birth. And I got custody of my son from a homeless shelter in 2010. Found out I was a father when I got out of prison. He was 2. And so never had a father. Now I'm a father. I met my wife in church. Beautiful woman, love her. She's my best friend, and we bought an old bowling alley in the middle of Springfield, and raised $1 million within a year and paid it off, refurbished it, and now we have an outreach center.
Wow!
Where else could you do that at, but America? I mean, I could go on and on about that, but we live in a great country, and I believe that this is the land of opportunity.
Absolutely.
For anyone who wants it, who's willing to work. Mm-hmm. God doesn't use lazy people to do anything. And so people who really want it, the sky's the limit.
It's only up to you.
I believe that. I believe that God rewards work. And if you knuckle down and work hard, that it makes sacrifices, then you can do it.
Mm-hmm. So what is your dream right now?
So my dream, I have a vision in my heart for our ministry. So there are people who feel like they have no worth and value in this world. You know what a stereotype is?
Of course, I'm Russian.
do you know the definition of a stereotype? It's a defined or fixed idea about a person or a thing. Mm-hmm. Okay?
Yeah.
And so you're looking at someone who has a stereotype on them. The world says I'm a criminal because I committed a crime, but I'm not a criminal. Governor Parsons gave me a full pardon 2 years ago, and so I don't have a criminal record anymore. The world says I'm a drug addict because I use drugs, but I haven't touched drugs or alcohol since 2008 of June. I'm not a drug addict, and so there's these people in our society that have been given up on, and so my vision, the number one problem in the land of opportunity is addiction and crime. America is the leading in crime, prisons, addiction, all that. And so my heart is to raise up missionaries out of this people group. So I see people that come from addiction and crime as a people group. Like if you were going to go to Russia as a missionary, you would reach Russians. And so here, the drug addicts are a people group to me. And so I'm a missionary to that people group to help change them, people who have a crime and addiction. And so we have what's called the Timothy Project. And so right now we have 8 locations. We're in 4 states and 2 countries. And so we have an internship program right now where we're raising up men and women and training them and sending them out, supporting them monthly to go start freeways in other churches all over the world. So my big vision is within the next 5 years to start 10 outreaches a year all over the world to reach this people group and to make disciples, train up people to help them break addiction and break their criminal mentality to reach people that come from their background.
That's a beautiful dream. So finally, John, what is freedom?
So freedom. There's people who are walking around in prison right now that aren't incarcerated. So freedom isn't just physical freedom. Freedom is having peace, I believe, and so having a purpose. So I always ask people, who are you and what is your purpose? And you have to be able to answer both those questions to be free. And so today I know who I am, I have an identity, and I know what my purpose is. And so I believe that's freedom.
Thank you so much, John, for sharing your mind-blowing story with us. We are upon our break. We'll be back right after this. I'm here in the studio with Dallas County Prosecutor Jonathan Barker. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
So right before I got to interview you, I spoke to John Stroup. He shared with me his thoughts on the American dream and his life path from being in prison to becoming a pastor in the church. I thought it would be interesting to interview someone who has always been on the protective side of the law, I guess if you can say. So let's begin. Like I mentioned before, you are a Dallas County prosecutor. Is that the area where you are originally from?
No, it's not, but that's where I've lived for several years, and that's where all my children were born. Mm-hmm. Actually, for several years before that, I worked here in Greene County as an assistant prosecutor as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell me a little bit about your family, because I'm trying to learn, why did you decide to become a prosecutor?
I understand. I'm one of 6 kids. My father was in law enforcement.
Okay.
And so it was just the way we were raised. There was a definite distinction between good guys and bad guys, and you were one or you were the other. So growing up, it was very clear to me I wanted to be one of the good guys. I just was drawn to being a prosecutor. And really, since I was a kid, the prosecutor side of things was what was attractive to me and what I wanted to get into.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you practiced law?
I've been a member of the Missouri Bar since 2006. I started working in the prosecutor's office in Kansas City as part of a clinic when I was actually in law school. So I worked with the prosecutors there, and then I've been a prosecutor. I got on the bar in October of 2006, and I've been a prosecutor since really 2007 with just brief interruptions.
Wow, I was 8 years old.
Yes, I'm an old man. Thank you for that.
So what type of cases do you usually manage?
Well, in the office I'm in now in Dallas County, there's only 2 of us. There's me and an assistant prosecutor. And then we have 2 staff people that help us manage our cases, but they're not lawyers. So I really I can go to court on a given day and handle any case, from a traffic ticket, an assault, an arson, a murder, all in the same day. So it's unique being in a small office. When I was at Greene County, there were different times when I specialized really in different kinds of cases, property cases or cases with children as victims or sort of major crimes cases at different times during my career. But being in the small office now, I really handle a little bit of everything on every day.
Mm-hmm. So you don't have a specific typical client?
Nope. It's all, I always represent the state, but it's in all different kinds of cases. We have different kinds of victims, adults, children, whatever that individual case calls for. Mm-hmm. And so we have to be really good at sort of dealing with all different kinds of people.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the most important qualities for a prosecutor?
Well, I thought a lot about that. To be a prosecutor, to be interested in prosecution, you have to kind of have this overarching desire to you called it protective when we started talking. Mm-hmm. You have to kind of have this overarching desire to do the right thing, to help folks, to make the community safer and provide a better environment for, young people and old folks and really everybody in between. Mm-hmm. And then you have to be willing to constantly reevaluate so that you can make sure you're doing the right thing. I think when you have a client and you have a perspective and the client wants you to do something, it's easy in some kinds of legal practice to say, I'm just going to take my client's position and run with it. When you're a prosecutor, your job is to do the right thing, to try to find justice. And as you learn about your case and go through it, sometimes your perspective changes. So you have to be willing to reevaluate. You have to be willing to sort of make sure you're on the right path and adjust that where necessary.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What experience do you have that relates to be a prosecutor?
Well, you have to have a law degree in order to be a prosecutor. And then any experience you have, really both legal experience but also life experience contributes to that, because your perspective is very important. When you deal with different kinds of offenders, especially young nonviolent offenders, you're kind of looking at the world in a different way because you're trying to figure out how to help them pay for what they did, learn their lesson, but you're trying to do that without maybe ruining their life, sticking them with a felony conviction. Maybe they don't need to be in custody. And so you can draw on your own personal experiences. For me, being a young man, maybe not making all the best decisions, I maybe didn't make those mistakes, but I can understand where they're coming from. So my legal experience and my personal experience really sort of gives me the perspective I need to deal with those cases.
Okay. And what kind of maybe strategies and a mindset is it requires to be a prosecutor?
Well, you have to be humble, but you also have to be aggressive. And so you're in a position where you have to be willing to look at the case. Like I mentioned earlier, you have to constantly be reevaluating it as witnesses change and as you gather more information. But you have to be willing to work hard, and you have to be willing to be ethical. The prosecutor's required to turn everything they learn about the case really over to the defense attorney. There's no room for hiding anything or practicing law by ambush. So you have to be willing to be as honest and ethical as you can be, and you have to be willing to do all the work it takes to get the case ready so that you know everything and you know you're doing the right thing before you go forward with the case. Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that all of that takes a lot of time and energy. And I just want to hear, what is it like to live a day of a life of a prosecutor? So describe to me your daily routine as a prosecutor.
Well, it's hard because every day is different, which is one of the great things about my job. I never know when I show up at work in the morning what's going to come through the door. I would say since we handle cases really from the moment that the 911 call comes in and the officers respond to a call, they may call me all hours of the night to find out what do we need to do to get a search warrant, what do we need to do in order to get this case pulled together, and I can give them some insight and advice. I don't direct their investigation, but I can help them along the way. And by the time I get to the office, I may have been on the phone for any number of hours trying to get that stuff together. We can file a charge that has just originated while someone's in custody in the first 24 hours. Often I meet with victims to explain decisions being made on a case or to prepare them for a hearing. I meet with defense attorneys every day to negotiate cases, and then it's off to court where I'll handle any kind of hearing, evidentiary hearing in front of the judge, maybe a plea, maybe a trial, maybe some other sort of hearing. And every day can be different, which is exciting. It's also very stressful. And it can be very challenging, but you're never going to live the same day twice if you're a prosecutor.
It's okay if you can't answer this question for privacy purposes, but what was the scariest case that kind of gave you chills when you heard about it, that you've handled?
Well, the case I got the most frightened of and the most chills from was my very first case, because I was new and I was nervous.
Right.
But along the way, there are very few defendants that scare me. But there have been a few.
What scares you?
You know it when you see it. Well, most of the time when you get into a case, you're dealing with real people who've made poor choices. Every once in a while, I've met a defendant who I think was an evil person. Fortunately, it's very rare. But when you look into the eyes of somebody like that, it does put a little bit of a chill up your spine.
Can you tell by looking at the person if they can commit a crime or not?
Well, I wish I had that ability, but no. But you read the reports, you see the videos, you review the lab reports, you meet with the officers and the witnesses, and then you lay eyes on a defendant. And I wish I could say with 100% certainty who did what just by looking at them. But it's based on everything I know about the case and everything I've read, and then every once in a while, you meet somebody that is a little bit chilling.
And speaking of stress, how do you handle stress?
Well, it's hard. I don't have a lot of hobbies. I'm a parent and I have children of my own. And so I spend a lot of time with them, and that's really rehabilitative to me because it gives me, it reminds me of why I do what I do. My brother is trying to teach me some woodworking, which is nice. And I'd like to learn how to play the guitar. I've, in my adult life, tried a time or two to get started on that, but it's hard to find the time to do it because in a county like mine, where there's only 2 prosecutors in the office, there's enough work to keep me busy 24/7 if I let it. So I have to be careful not to spend too much time at the office.
So how does it make you feel when you meet someone that has committed a crime in the past?
You mean outside of work?
Yes.
Well, it's interesting. I think many prosecutors, well, for me personally, I think many prosecutors also feel this way. I think I have a better perspective on it than a lot of folks because I've been involved with so many cases in my career that I've actually seen a lot of people who, like I mentioned before, they're regular people who've made poor choices. And once they've gotten involved in the system, they've decided that's not the path they want to go down. And so they're able to kind of turn it around. And those people, I enjoy meeting them.
Like John Stroup. I got to interview him right before he got here. And he fascinated me with his story. He was in prison for drug dealing and for drug use. And then after that, he got out of the prison and he is now a church pastor.
It's good to hear stories like that. And I really enjoy, we take a lot of chances on people with probation and different things as prosecutors. When we see people succeed, it's very thrilling for us. I think every prosecutor probably has defendants they really root for. They really want to see them make it. And when one of them makes it, it's very edifying. So I've not met Mr. Stroup that I'm aware of, but I'm happy to hear about that because anybody who gets through it and struggles through it and realizes, hey, look, I can do better than this, I'm very happy about that. On the other hand, I live in a small community. So if I go out in public and I run into someone who I've prosecuted or who I'm prosecuting and they're unhappy with me, it can be an uncomfortable situation. But I try to really sort of treat everybody that I deal with the respect they deserve. So if I run into someone in public, it's very unusual that I've run into somebody that I've gotten sideways with. Even defendants I'm prosecuting, I try to treat them respectfully. This is something that I have to do as part of my job and for my community. And most of them are well aware of that, and it doesn't usually end up in any sort of confrontation. But it can, and it's uncomfortable when it does.
And you have mentioned that your family is what makes you feel comfortable.
Yes.
It's your safe area, safe space after a stressful day at work.
That's right.
Okay, so do you have a big family?
I have 4 children. And my wife and I have 4 children. We've been married a long time. As you mentioned earlier, I'm an old man. So. But I enjoy spending time with them. That is really what keeps me going every day.
And do you know anything about your origin family? And what generation of immigrants are you?
I do. my mother's side, my great-grandmother, her name was Luella Heater. Before that, it was Luella Jorgensen.
Okay.
And she died in, I think, 2008. She was 99 years old. She had done a tremendous amount of family history research on my mom's side of the family.
Okay.
My mother's side of the family comes from Sweden and Denmark mostly.
Okay.
There's some others mixed in there too, but they came through my maternal grandmother and grandfather. They came from Denmark in the 1730s and 40s, and from Sweden in the 1870s, which is a little bit later for a lot of immigrant families. And so we kind of have a lot of different stories and experiences there. Some of the ones that came earlier, and some of the ones that came from them were even pioneers that made their way out west during westward expansion. And so that's kind of a really neat part of my history. My father's side, they are mostly from what are now United Kingdom countries. They came over in the 1730s and the 1830s from England and Northern Ireland. And also, a rich history there that is a lot of fun. I knew my grandparents on my dad's side, but I didn't know any further back than that. And on my mom's side, like I said, I knew my great-grandparents. And when I was young, that was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you learned about this yourself?
Well, as I mentioned, my great-grandmother on my mom's side, she put that research together. She made a book that had a lot of that information. And, of course, she was born, I believe, in 1908. And she would have been within 100 years of some of those immigrants, which I find to be really fascinating. How we look at generations, but if you look at a person who lives 100 years, if she had one ancestor that lived 100 years before her, that's back to immigration. Mm-hmm. So it's really kind of interesting. On my dad's side, there's my daughter, actually, who's an adult. Her name's Madeline Harlow. She's married now. Mm-hmm. She's done a lot of research. And so I'm not as into that as she is, but she's found some really interesting characters from our family back through, the old days in Europe and before the countries were what they are now, kind of tracked that back. She was happy to tell me about these stories through the years, and I've listened to her, and it's really interesting the way she's gotten into it as a young American today, being interested in her family history, who they were and why they came. And I'm glad that she's interested in that because you can't forget your roots. It's very important.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And do you know why your family immigrated to the States?
Yes. Many of them came for religious freedom. They wanted to not be oppressed by the state. Many of them just came we talk about the American dream. Many of them came for opportunity. Most of them were as poor as anybody who ever came to America. They immigrated. They worked hard, many of them in poverty, but they were looking for freedom and they were looking for opportunity. Mm-hmm. And they didn't, while they came in, most of them through, immigration corridors on the East Coast, they found their way west into the Midwest and then into the reaches of California, even way out on the coast, because they were looking for opportunities to raise their families, to provide for them, and to live their lives the way they saw fit without being interfered with by the state.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Still to this day, freedom of religion is one of the main American dreams for immigrants because America is the only country that has that, freedom of religion. You can practice any religion you want or not practice religion at all. I just passed my citizenship test and it was one of the questions there.
Well, congratulations. That's exciting.
Thank you so much. So besides American Dream, that was freedom of religion for them. Was there anything else that you know?
Just opportunity. Especially for poor immigrants, the opportunity of the new world at that time, they didn't know what they would find, but they knew that that there would be competition and that there would be opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so those that came at that time were looking for opportunity. They wanted to have families, they wanted to have children, they wanted to provide.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So what do you think about the American dream?
Well, I think it's very specific to each person. And I think that's what's great about it is the flexibility of it. I very much still believe in freedom, whether it's religious freedom or whatever freedom each individual is seeking. For me, I seek the same things they did. I want to worship my God the way I see fit. I want to have opportunity to provide for my family, to raise my children, and so that they can have an opportunity to go further than me and be better than me. And I know that in America, I know that that's possible.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a specific American dream that you are currently working on, maybe?
Well, I do sometimes say, and I do know that it is a dream, I'd like to be fired. And I know that's a weird thing to say, but remember, I'm a prosecutor. And so really a dream that I would have that I sometimes joke about like that is I wish we could get to a time when they didn't need me anymore. Mm-hmm. And they came to me and said, hey, it's time for you to go learn a trade. It's time for you to be a farmer. It's time for you to do whatever it is you're going to do that you can contribute to the community in another way, because we've done so much work that we no longer need to have a prosecutor. And while it might be a dream and I may never see that day, it would be wonderful. It would be a wonderful thing for me to have to go find a trade where I use my hands or give back to the community in another way.
So finally, Jonathan, I asked the same question to John Stroup. What is freedom?
It means different things to different people.
What does it mean to you?
It's hard because we want to have more guidance. I think, to say freedom of what? But freedom for me means that I get to get up in the morning and I get to decide what I'm going to do. And if I want to, even in my 40s where I am now, if I want to change course, I can do that. It's going to require hard work. And freedom doesn't mean you get to pick without work. But I can change my career. I can change where I live. I can change where I go. I can choose to, travel to Springfield to meet with you. I can choose not to. And if I choose not to, I live with the consequences of my actions, but I get to determine what my actions are. And, every day I wake up and I get to choose how I'm going to behave and I get to choose what I'm going to do. And for me, that's really what it's about.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, for visiting me today. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram at podcasttad.